In this video, we are going to be talking about improving editing efficiency while we're working inside of a timeline in Premiere Pro. Specifically, we're going to spend a good chunk of the time talking about ripple functionality inside of Premiere. And this includes not only ripple edits, which you may have heard of, but other associated ripple functionality. There's a lot of different things that we can do to improve our editing efficiency by reducing excess gap creation, and also just generally avoiding the need to go back in and move a bunch of media around and do major reconstruction or fix things after certain tasks. So we'll look at ways that we can change the editing workflows by incorporating more of these ripple functions. Ripple functions will include copy and paste workflows. We'll quickly touch on paste insert just to make sure everybody is using that on a regular basis. We'll talk about a new feature that has been integrated called paste to same track that impacts track targeting inside of Premiere Pro. And there's some new and useful options in that regard. Managing gaps is another thing that we will cover, where we talk a little bit about a little known secret of how we can quickly either extend gaps when we need room to work or quickly delete gaps with a simple modifier key. So let's jump right in and let's start by looking at some editing essentials. We'll talk about some behaviors that might not be so great, and we'll look at some ways of improving them. Let's get started. Okay, so let's start by talking a little bit about the razor tool and some of the drawbacks of relying on this tool on a regular basis. One of the first things that we want to talk about is the fact that it's very mouse driven, that it's requiring a lot of additional clicks, including the need to constantly switch between tools. Once I've switched to the razor tool, I lose certain functionality. I can no longer click to select clips or trim clips or move clips, so I need to switch back to the selection tool in order to do these things. And because this is very much mouse driven, this can break efficient keyboard driven workflows. And you might be thinking, well, there are keyboard shortcuts for directly accessing these tools, and while that is definitely true and recommended, there are still better ways to work. Another issue with the razor tool is that the workflow really lacks precision. It's heavily reliant upon the position of the mouse cursor and also zoom level. In order to locate the exact frame that you want to create the cut on, you'll find yourself zooming in and out of your timeline constantly. These are additional unnecessary actions that you are going to be performing on a regular basis. Another problem is that if you're actually using the razor tool, you're creating excess chunks on the edges of your clips, and you need to go back in and do constant cleanup work. You're also creating gaps in your project. Lots of gaps on a regular basis. And while these usually aren't too bad to clean up on small and simple projects, they can lead to sync issues and override issues when we're working in more complex sequences. My preferred method of making cuts in the timeline is to use the Add Edit keyboard shortcut. This is Command K on Mac and Control K on Windows. You can use this keyboard shortcut after you precisely position the playhead. And once you find your frame, you can use the keyboard shortcut Command K to add an edit. The Add Edit function works according to track targeting, so pay attention to that. In this case, if I want to make a cut on the video clip on video 1, I need to make sure that that track is enabled. If you want to make cuts on multiple clips on various tracks, just make sure that those tracks are enabled. You can also add Shift to this keyboard shortcut if you'd like. You can see in this case that if I press Command Shift K, that it will razor through all of the tracks on the timeline, regardless of how track targeting is set. Or in other words, you can just make a quick cut through your entire sequence without having to worry how you have your track targeting set up. One other quick tip worth mentioning, if you select a clip, this will override track targeting in the timeline. So if you just want to make a quick cut, you can select the clip and press Command K, or of course you could select numerous clips on multiple tracks and Command K will apply to the selected clips. As we all know, you can simply click and drag the edge of a clip in order to perform a trim. You notice how we are pretty zoomed out in this particular view, that we're not getting a whole lot of precision. So we often find ourselves zooming in order to get more precision, in order to be able to trim to the exact frame that we want. We can use the playhead as a frame of reference. We can move it around and precisely position it, and then we can drag the edge of the clip to the playhead. So this is a little bit more of a precise way to work, but we're still creating gaps in our timeline. In this case, it's not the end of the world because it's a really simple timeline. However, these are all extra steps, and these are all things that will become more of a problem if you're dealing with larger, more complicated sequences that have multiple layers. But for now, let's take a look at a couple of very popular keyboard shortcuts, the Q and W keys. We'll use these to perform more of an automated ripple edit to reduce the amount of gaps that are created as we edit. Let's open up the keyboard shortcut editor and take a look. I will type in ripple, and you can see right down here the two things that pop up are ripple trim next edit to playhead, W, and ripple trim previous edit to playhead. And of course, we will be using these keyboard shortcuts to perform ripple trims on the heads and the tails of our clips. I can use JK&L to scrub and preview through my different clips. Or if I want to get really accurate, I can use the left and right arrow keys to precisely position the playhead. Then I can press the Q or the W keys to perform this ripple edit. Let's work on trimming the latter portion of this clip that I'm scrubbing through. Notice I will navigate to the frame where I want to perform my edit. And when I press the W key, the clip is automatically trimmed, the excess footage is removed, and the gap is sealed. Let's trim a little bit off the head of this next clip with the Q key and move down just a little bit, and then we'll also trim the tail with the W key. See, here's where a car is going to come into view, so I'll back up to here, press Q, and then as the car maybe comes down about halfway into the scene, I'll press W, and maybe one more clip here. I'll scrub down to where the car's coming into view. I'll press Q to trim the head of the clip, and then I'll come down to about right here and press W. So you can see this is a really nice way to work, where it is sealing all of the gaps. It's keeping us keyboard driven. And overall, it's a great technique if you want to bring a bunch of footage into a timeline and quickly create your first rough cut. By now, you may have noticed that we are starting to see some common themes inside of Premiere Pro. We're looking to reduce the amount of gaps that are created on a regular basis inside of Premiere Pro and reduce the need to have to move around large chunks of your timeline. We're trying to avoid excess cleanup work here. So let's take this a little bit further. Let's keep going with this idea and take a look at some additional ways that we can incorporate more ripple functions into our editing workflow. You can see I've got a little bit more of a complex timeline here. I have an audio track down at the bottom, and I've got 2 or 3 layers of video. So let's say in this case that I want to trim the video clip that's on V3. I could use the playhead to find the frame that I want to cut to, and I could drag that over, and now I have some cleanup work that I have to do. So what I could try to do is I could try to use the track forward tool, which is an efficient way of moving everything that's to the right of this tool over. But you can see that since I have long clips on V1 and A1, that it's moving more clips than I want. I don't want to affect those clips. So what I've seen a lot of people do, and I find myself doing quite a bit, is you zoom out and then you press V to get to the selection tool to select all of the clips that you might want to move. And then you zoom back in, and once they're selected, you drag them over. And sometimes it'll snap precisely, but if there's a lot of edit points in your sequence, this snapping doesn't work quite as well as you would like. And so you're, again, just adding a little bit more additional work than you need to. So I'm going to hit Command Z, and I'm going to undo that trim. Now let's take a look at performing another ripple edit. And in this case, what we're going to do is we're going to continue to use the playhead to position it to the frame that we want to trim to. And then I'm going to hold down the Command key on Mac. And as I hover over the edge of this clip, you can see that my tools are changing. So if I'm right on the clip, I get this rolling edit tool. But if I move just over to the right a little bit, then I get this yellow tool, which means I'm going to perform a ripple edit. And as I click and I drag the edge of that clip and I snap to my playhead, notice a ripple edit occurs where it trims that clip exactly to the frame that I specified, and the footage that was on V2 and V3 down to the right automatically rippled to where I wanted to. I'll show that one more time. Position my playhead and watch what happens to the footage over to the right. Drag to the playhead, and you can see that it trimmed it to the frame that I had specified, and it moved all the clips on video 2 and video 3 over to the left, automatically sealing the gap. You can also use this technique to roll out more footage in a timeline. So say, for example, over on this clip, hold the command key so I have access to my yellow trim tool, drag it over to the playhead, and you can see it performed a trim where the cars come into view. I can also use this tool to trim the other direction. So if I drag to the left, I'm actually rolling footage out. So you can see now, the car is no longer in view. This gives us a lot of control, and it also eliminated the need to move everything on the right of our timeline over to the right to create a new hole so that we could roll out footage and potentially introduce sync issues or overwriting clips as we move things around. And if you are dealing with very complicated sequences, remember that locking tracks, we don't have to do it in this particular case, but if you have a more complex timeline and certain tracks are being affected and you don't want them to be, remember it's super easy to just come down here and lock the tracks that you do not want to change, say for example video 3, and then you can continue to have your edits be very focused on the specific tracks that you want to work with. In this next section, we're going to take a look at a quick tip that we can incorporate for managing gaps in our timeline. There are times when you want to widen a gap, just so you have a little bit more room to work while you're inside of a timeline. And when you widen this gap, you want to quickly cause that gap to be created where everything is neatly rippled down into the timeline, so you don't cause any sync issues, so your markers don't get shifted off into the wrong position. And I'll show you a quick way that we can do that with a simple modifier key. There are also times when you may have a bunch of extra gaps, and we'll use this same technique to quickly delete them. So this is a really cool technique. It's a very simple modifier, and I don't think that most people are familiar with it. Let's take a look. Notice if I hover over here to the right, or actually to the left of the clip, but it's the right-hand portion of the gap, and I click and I drag to the right, that's actually going to extend the gap. It's going to ripple extend. And if I hold the command modifier down and I drag all the way over to the left-hand portion, it will actually delete the gap entirely. So this is just a super useful way where you're already used to using the command modifier to give you additional options for dealing with gaps, whether or not you want to carve a hole in your timeline or carve a bigger hole to work, or you just want to quickly remove a gap between clips. It can be quite useful. We can also use the command key as a modifier when we're dragging media around inside of a sequence. Of course, this also applies to dragging media between sequences or even bringing in media from the source or the project panels. This is a super useful way to automatically either create a gap or remove a gap when we're moving things around. Notice in my project that I have two sequences open that are stacked on top of each other. If I select a clip inside of this source sequence and I drag it down to the sequence below where I want to insert this media and I hold the command key, notice it indicates that we are going to perform a ripple insert. If I keep the command key held down and I release my mouse, it will insert the clip and it will ripple everything else in the timeline down to the right. I can do the same thing with the project panel. I'll go over to the project panel and I will select a clip and I'll drag it into my sequence. Again, if I'm holding the command key, it will give me the option to perform a ripple insert. If I want to double click the same clip inside of the project panel to load it into the source, I can trim my clip if I want to. And then once again, I can drag this down into my sequence, press the command key, and do another ripple insert. Of course, this is very similar to using the insert function of the source panel, and you can do that in more of a keyboard-driven workflow, but we'll talk about that more in a separate video. We can also use the command key to perform a ripple extraction of a clip in a timeline. Notice I have a few clips here lined up, and let's just say I want to get one of these clips out of the way. I don't want to use it in my sequence. So what I can do is I can hold the command key and I press this command key before I click to select the clip. When I do this, notice I get an indication that a ripple extraction is going to occur. And if I drag that over to the right, it just extracts the clip, seals the gap, easy enough. I can also combine this with the technique that we were just talking about, ripple insert. Notice if I select this clip, keeping command held down, when I drag the clip over to the left, it will perform a ripple extraction, and it will also insert it with a ripple insert exactly at the location when I let go of my mouse. Pretty cool. Easy way to move some things around in a timeline. There are some cases where when you're working inside of a very complex sequence, the ripple insert can cause other tracks to ripple down in the timeline. And of course, you could solve this problem by locking those tracks. A better option is to add Option to our keyboard shortcut, so we are pressing and holding Command and Option while performing these operations. And this executes the rearrange edit. Notice, for example, with this more complex sequence, if I do not hold down the Option key, it causes media on the other tracks to be shifted down in the timeline. If I hold down both Command and Option, it makes this rearrange function more track focused. In this next section, we're going to talk a little bit about copy and paste workflows inside of Premiere Pro. We're going to start by covering very quickly the concept of a paste insert or a ripple insert, as this is a very useful feature that everybody should be using to at least some extent in their workflows. I want to make sure that everybody is aware of it. We're going to talk a little bit about how copy and paste works according to track targeting, and then we're going to talk about some changes in that area. Adobe has integrated a new feature called Paste to Same Track. This was actually a feature that I was happy to work on and deliver something that provided additional options for users that were requesting a little bit different functionality. So we're going to cover that in this next section as well. When we are moving media around, we also have the option of using the keyboard shortcuts, Command C and Command V, copy and paste, pretty straightforward stuff. We may want to use these when we don't want to drag media around, as they can be a little bit more precise because they are going to paste where you position the playhead. Let's say, for example, I want to copy some media from a different sequence. I'll select the media that I want to copy, press Command C, return to my destination sequence, and I'll press Command V. By default, that will overwrite media right where I position the playhead, and it will paste according to the lowest targeted track. So I can change that. If I want to move up a track, I can select video 2, for example, paste it in, and it will respect the track targeting. However, there are going to be times when you're just going to want to also perform a ripple insert. And so to do that, remember you can hold down the Shift key in this case, and when you press Command Shift V, it will perform a ripple paste or a ripple insert, and it'll shift all of the media in your timeline down to the right. For a long time, we have relied on the track targeting operations inside of Premiere Pro to determine the behavior of a number of different editing operations. So let's say by default that we're set up with track targeting set to video 1, and we want to perform copy and paste operations. If I press Command C and I press Command V, it's going to copy and paste this clip from the track it is in to the track that it's targeted. So if I select this clip and press Command C, and then I press Command V, it will also paste into the targeted track. And this has been the way that Premiere has been designed, and this is a very precise way of working. What this can mean, though, is that you might need to go in and change this track targeting on occasion to make sure that you're pasting from one track to another. And you may very much want to perform a very explicit paste operation where you're intentionally pasting into a specific track. However, we did have a number of different user requests that preferred a slightly different behavior. So we're going to talk about that a little bit. And basically what the expectation was to many users is they always wanted the copy and the paste operation to apply to the exact same track. You can see that we have these keyboard shortcuts that are set up on an application-wide basis. Paste, paste insert, and paste attributes, which we're not covering in this video. But basically, The paste operation and the paste insert operation is an application-wide command, and it just so happens to work in a particular way in the timeline, the way that I just described. It works according to track targeting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in and I'm going to reset to the default keyboard shortcuts, which you may also need to do. And we search for paste. What we can see is we now have these new commands that are related to the timeline panel. And what happens now is these new commands will override the older behaviors when the timeline panel is active. But you can go in and you can use these to override and change the behaviors that we're talking about. So once these new keyboard shortcuts are set, you can see that no matter how track targeting is specified over here in Premiere Pro, now I can press Command C and Command V and clips will be pasted to and from the same track. You can change these behaviors however you like. There's lots of options and many different ways that you can configure this. If you want to go back to the old behavior and you don't like this new functionality, you can simply delete these two keyboard shortcuts. Also, one thing I didn't mention is you notice that we have the ability to paste insert as well. We only use the regular paste. But if you want to create new keyboard shortcuts for paste insert to the target track or pasting to a target track, you can also add additional keyboard shortcuts. So you can preserve the older behavior and you can also use the new behavior depending on how you want to configure your keyboard shortcuts. In this next section, let's look at a few different scenarios where you may want to remove a portion of an existing timeline. For example, there may be a case where you have a large section of a timeline and you simply want to remove or extract it. And that section probably exists on all the tracks, audio tracks, video tracks, and you just want to remove everything at once. Easy enough to do. There also may be times when you want to isolate a specific clip or even a specific word or a specific sound. And so this is a very common operation as you're working through your different projects that you might find yourself performing over and over again. So let's take a look at a couple really quick and efficient methods that we can use to perform this type of task on a regular basis. Working on finishing up these training videos was a pretty good example where I found myself restating things quite often. So I was very focused on the dialogue and I was going back through the clips focusing on the words, and I found myself needing to continually extract particular sections. One of the ways that I like to work is I like to set in and out points. If I set an in point for a section of the clip that I want to remove, again, I can navigate with my arrow keys to move the playhead around, press the O key, and then what I can do is I can use the extract command, which is set up to use the apostrophe key. And if I press that keyboard shortcut, it will extract that section of the timeline. Once the extraction has been completed, the in and out points are reset in the timeline, so I can just simply move down and continue editing on latter portions of the clip. I can continue to set in and out points and extract whatever sections I need to. Give this a shot if you haven't tried it, because it's probably the simplest and easiest way, and it's keyboard driven. You just work through your clip, press IO, press the apostrophe key, and all those sections are removed continuously, one after the other. I find it to be a very efficient way to work. One other quick technique that's worth covering here, and this technique is going to do pretty much the same thing we just did with our in and out points and our extract key, but we're just going to do it in a different way. And it's kind of interesting to think about this because we're combining some of the same techniques that we've talked about previously in this video. What we're going to do is we're going to find where we want our section that we're going to extract. We want to find the beginning point of that section. And what we're going to do is we're going to move the playhead around, and then we're going to press Command K to create an edit point or a cut in the clip. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move down to where we want the extracted section to end. And then we position the playhead and press the Q key. When I press the Q key, it will ripple trim from the location of the playhead to the previous edit point, and it removes that section of our clip. I think I'll probably still stick with using the in and out point technique. Maybe it's just something that I'm used to, but this is certainly another really good option. Give it a shot, see which one you like the best. So hopefully you have picked up some useful tips when it comes to incorporating more ripple functionality into your day-to-day editing workflows. Hopefully this makes it a little bit easier when it comes to moving things around in a timeline, reducing excess gap creation, and just generally trimming up your clips. I've also made a follow-up video where we dive a bit deeper into more advanced trimming workflows. And of course, we'll cover the associated keyboard shortcuts and modifiers. We'll be looking at trimming clips on a frame-by-frame basis using more of a keyboard shortcut-driven workflow. And we'll also get into dynamic trimming workflows where you can actually play your trim on the fly. Some pretty cool stuff. So if you have interest in any of those topics, feel free to check out the video.